Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers from last week. Obviously, the freshman wide receivers really showed out and the ACC did not. So I wanted to break that down real quick for you guys, but let's get into the top 10 teams. There were a number of big time storylines from this past weekend around these top 10 teams, and a couple that did really good work this past weekend, a couple that did not. And I'll get into all of the details on that right here. So let's start with the Ohio State Buckeyes, who got a big win, 52-6 over Akron, and this was a pretty straightforward performance from Ohio State. Started a little bit slow, but had a great second half, and I think Will Howard showed that he can really run this offense. Went 17 for 28, 228 yards, 3 touchdowns, and honestly had a couple of drops in there as well. So it was really impressive. I thought did exactly what you wanted them to do. I think the quarterback run game will be a bigger part of the offense as they move forward, but relatively it was vanilla on Saturday. Just overall, I think they kept everything pretty basic and made sure that this offense moved, and it really did in that second half. So really impressive. They had 2 defensive touchdowns from Lathan Ransom and Gabe Powers and another pick from Denzel Burke. So they looked like they themselves on defense, that is for sure. They looked like the team that we expected them to be, and I think they're going to continue that trend. They have quite a bit of time to figure out who they need to be before they get into Big Ten play and before they get into real big-time Big Ten play when they head out to Oregon. But overall, there's a ton of positives here. I think the quarterback run game will be utilized more going forward, but this was pretty much an autopilot blowout for this team. They did exactly what they needed to do in week 1, and although I have respect for the Zips, I don't necessarily think this was too much of a challenge for Ohio State. So we'll see what they're about in a couple of weeks here, but at the end of the day, they have quite a bit of time to figure out all of the little things they need to figure out and then hit the ground running when they hit Big Ten play. So good performance from Ohio State, not a ton of negatives to take away from it. A little bit of a slow start, which is a little bit worrisome, but other than that, an absolute dominating performance and exactly what you would expect from Ohio State. Moving on to Texas, this was really impressive to me. When I was watching this game this past weekend, I did not think that Texas was going to, first of all, shut them out. Colorado State, the amount that they throw the ball, the ability that they throw the ball with is really impressive, and they weren't able to do any of it. There was 2 Colorado State quarterbacks that played in this game, Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, the starter, and then Brousseau came in a little bit later, but they went a combined 13 for 24, 74 yards passing, 0 touchdowns, and 2 picks. It was domination from the back end of that Texas defense, and especially that play from Jahdae Barron on that pick was outright insane. It's one of the reasons that he just has to be on the field one way or the other, whether it's at corner, at nickelback, at safety. That guy has to be on the field for Texas. But overall, I think when you look at this team, there were a couple of little worries around the offensive and defensive line, a couple of runs that got a little bit too far for this team on defense, but overall, really impressive. Quinn Ewers had a small blip early on in this game with a pick, but overall hit every single spot he could want. Had a very cool no-look pass late on in that game to Matthew Golden, but overall, the big-time news coming out of this one was Arch Manning. I believe he got the biggest crowd pop coming off the sideline to get into that game, and played really well. Pass for a touchdown, pass for a touchdown on a very weird play to Silas Bolden, and then rush for a touchdown. The talent is very obvious, and frankly, I think if Quinn Ewers goes down again, as he did the past 2 years, I think they would feel very confident with Arch running this offense. He looked really good, and although it was late in the game, garbage time, he was very impressive. And they got plenty from the running backs. Didn't necessarily lean on them too much in this game. I think you'll see a little bit more of that running back by committee against Michigan, but everything is all systems go for Texas as they head into that Michigan game this weekend. Alabama was really impressive as well. We got to see Jalen Milroe and Kalen DeBoer's offense, and it was exactly what you would expect. It was really explosive. It was really impressive, and more than anything, I'm impressed with the defense. But getting to Jalen Milroe here for a second, went 7 for 9, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air, 79 yards on the ground, and 2 touchdowns. Just ridiculous performances. If he's doing that all year, this is your Heisman winner, and he's running away with it. I can promise you that. There was a ton of running in this game. 47 rushes, 18 passes for Alabama, so you can see the difference in the offense. And then then you saw what Ryan Williams was able to do on those long touchdowns. Really impressive performance from the young guy. I think they're likely going to need a couple more guys to step up. I think Kendrick Law and Jeremy Bernard are going to be huge pieces for this team going forward, but overall, the guys that really showed out were the defense. It was incredible what they were able to do against a team that is going to throw the ball around, is going to go quick, is going to do a lot of those different things. They were able to shut them down pretty much from start to finish. Jahad Campbell was incredible throughout this game, making just about every tackle you could want, and then Kwal Rousseau was all over this team. He was in the backfield pretty much every single time, so really impressive performance from this defense. I think Kane Womack has brought over exactly what they needed. A little bit of aggression, a little bit of more blitz-heavy type defense, and it's really working, at least through game one. Obviously, a ton of big-time tests with South Florida, then Wisconsin, then obviously Georgia coming to town for Alabama. So this is definitely going to be the easier of their games this upcoming season, but a really remarkable performance, and I think exactly what Alabama fans wanted to see in Kalen DeBoer's debut. Moving on to Ole Miss, they went to work. It was absolutely incredible to watch this offense go to work this Saturday, 76-0 over Furman, and Jackson Dart was at the very center of it. And I understand it was Furman, but the stuff he did in the first half was just outright ridiculous. 22 of 27, over 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, a rush on the ground, or a touchdown on the ground, just ridiculous. And he had all 4 receivers getting involved, all guys over 40 yards, so it was incredible to watch that offense go to work. And then on the defensive side of the ball, 4 sacks, 16 tackles for loss. They did exactly what they wanted to do with Chris Paul Jr., Cam Franklin, and Chris Hardy getting really in on the action. So it was really impressive. Overall, this team looked the part. They looked exactly how you wanted them to look in that first game. And then obviously it kicks up from here. They get things get a lot more real, and a lot more hype goes into this team that already had insane amounts going into the season. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, they have a couple of games to get ready before SEC play, but as of right now, everything looks really good for this Rebels team. But moving on to the teams that gave us a little bit of something to worry about, and I'll start with the Oregon Ducks. This one was really weird. If you look at the box score for this one, you would think that Oregon won by 28, 35 points, because they had really good days all around. Dylan Gabriel had almost 400 yards passing, went 41 for 49, which is another problem we'll get to here in a second. But in this game, Oregon had a missed field goal, a fumble, and 2 turnovers on downs. Now, some of that stuff is not going to happen too often. Some of that stuff could happen very often. You know, that missed field goal could be a sign of what's to come. The turnover on downs likely aren't going to happen against a team that's not named Idaho, because you likely are not going to go for it in those situations against a team not named Idaho. So I'm not overly worried about that part of it. The thing I am worried about is this offensive line. The injury to Matthew Bedford was huge for this team. Idaho had 3 sacks in this game. That should never happen, just plain and simple. Bo Nix was sacked 6 times all of last year, so it is entirely different on this offensive line and does not look the part as of right now, and I think it's going to be a minute until Matthew Bedford gets back. Not exactly sure when that's going to be, but they got to figure that out one way or the other, because they could not run the ball in this game. Went for 2.9 yards per carry, threw the ball 49 times, and that's why. They had no running game to speak of, and overall, I'm not all that worried about Oregon. I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be able to play much better football going forward, and hopefully that offensive line figures itself out. But as of right now, they don't look all that explosive on offense, because Dylan Gabriel doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, and he did hit a helmet early on in this game, so maybe that's something to watch as they move forward. But they got Boise State coming to town, and as we saw this past weekend, they can score with you. So if they are not able to put up the points that they need to, if they're not able to run the ball the way that they need to this upcoming weekend, that one could get a little bit closer than we're expecting. So Oregon, a lot of hype going into this season. I still tend to believe they are one of the top teams in the country, but this was a really worrying performance, and a number of things that aren't necessarily going to be fixed just overnight. But moving on, Michigan also had a very rough performance this past weekend. This one was ugly at times for Michigan. The passing game was not necessarily where you want it to be as of right now, and it was Davis Warren who ended up getting the start at quarterback, but it was not clean. 15 for 25, 118 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 INT, and the biggest difference is when they targeted Colston Loveland, they were very successful. When they didn't, they were not at all. Colston Loveland, they went 8 for 9 when passing to him, 87 yards and a touchdown. When not, it was 7 for 16 passing, 31 yards and an INT. So that's the offense. If that's going to be the offense going forward, you're going to be able to key in on that guy in particular, put a safety over top, have a linebacker trail him, and you're not going to be able to get the ball to him, plain and simple. So if that's the plan going into this Texas game, if they have no other wide receivers show up in that Texas game, then they're in a lot of trouble. Now, there's a number of things that can be fixed throughout the next couple of weeks, and they have a big one that might not give them a ton of chances to fix it, but overall, they got to figure out a number of different things. The defense played their part. They did exactly what you expect them to do, but at the end of the day, the run game was not good at all. Donovan Edwards had 27 rushing yards on 11 carries. It was just all over the place, and they have a number of issues that they have to figure out. The quarterback, if he is not going to be totally on target every single time, they have to find difference makers on the outside, and they have not found them yet. So as of right now, going into this weekend, Michigan has a number of issues that if Texas can't exploit them, then it's going to get ugly in a hurry. So we'll figure out what happens with Michigan going forward, but as of right now, this offense looks very, very clunky. The defense doesn't look quite as dominant as they did a year ago, and maybe most importantly, this offensive line looks like they took the step back that a lot of us were expecting them to take. So they're going into a huge game this weekend against Texas, and it could get ugly if they do not have these things figured out for Michigan. But moving on to Florida State, this one was bad. We talked about it earlier in the show, so I won't waste too much time here, but I don't know how this happened. I don't know how you had what happened in week one happen and then walk out on the field, on your own field, and get dominated this way. It was ugly from start to finish. DJ was all over the place. The offensive and defensive game plans were downright terrible. Boston College wasn't even being really all that dynamic on offense and was still really capable of doing everything they wanted to do. They got outrushed by 242 yards. It was domination all over the place for Boston College, and it just shouldn't have been, especially after what happened last week and a year ago to Florida State. It's remarkable what this team has done the first couple of weeks, and not in the good way. I don't know where they go from here. I don't know how they bounce back. They keep moving forward, I guess, but maybe it's Brock Glenn out there the next time they take the field against Memphis, and maybe they lose that game. So it's going to get really interesting around Florida State and a couple of teams that just had really, really bad performances. You know, Oregon, I'm a little bit less worried about than Michigan and Florida State, obviously, than Florida State. But at the end of the day, all of those have big-time worry spots where if you get to an Ohio State game or Michigan, they have one this weekend. If they get to those games not being fully prepared and not fixing some of those issues, they might just get dominated, and it could take them out of that real running to win their conference, to do the things that they want to do. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch that over the next couple of weeks, but some really rough performances from Oregon, Michigan, and Florida State this past weekend. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a week one whip around. We did this yesterday, but I want to continue today. We have a number of different things I want to update you guys on, and a number of just ridiculous performances from this past week that I want to get on y'all's radar. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.